I'm now going to hand over to our first plenary. And I'm delighted that I'm going to introduce Serge Colle, an old colleague of mine, who is now the Global Power and Utilities Lead at Ernst & Young. We're just going to go to a short video, and then it's over to Serge to take forward the session, which is again on connecting energy societies. Great to be here and great to be with you over the course of the next 3 days.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Arthur, for the introduction. I was looking for the cue to get started, which is never really easy in the digital platform. But in any case, I'm really excited to open the first session of this year's World Energy Week under the theme Connecting Energy Societies. So my name is Serge Colle. I'm the EY Global Power and Utilities sector leader, and I will be the moderator for this first session. So in this session, we will be discussing the impacts and the learnings of the COVID-19 crisis on the energy transition, but also the requirements to more than ever humanize the energy transition by connecting energy societies. I'm really delighted that we are joined by a very senior lineup of speakers from the industry to provide perspectives on the topic. So let me very quickly introduce them. We have Angela Wilkinson, whom I trust you all know, so Secretary General and CEO of the World Energy Council. We have Leena Srivastava, Deputy Director General for Science with the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. We have Kirill Komarov, First Deputy Director General for Corporate Development and International Business with ROSATOM. And we have Jochen Eickholt, Executive Board Member with Siemens Energy. Now, the structure of the session will be as follows. We will first have Angela doing a short opening brief, then we'll have different statements from our speakers as a reaction, and then we'll start the discussion after that. I really would like to encourage you all to ask questions in the chat box. They will be moderated through the chat function, if you will, and depending on when I get the questions and how many questions I'm getting, I will be using those also to feed into the debate, hoping we can mimic, I would say, the live experience as much as possible. And after that, we will move to conclusion. So without further ado, Angela, I would like to hand over to you for a first opening statement.
Thank you, Serge. I'd like to say a big hello to everybody at the opening session, Connecting Energy Societies of World Energy Week Live. As the 6th Secretary General of the World Energy Council, this is a challenging and also an important time for us as the world's first and only truly open worldwide energy community. And today I'd like to set the scene a little bit, but before that, I'd like to extend our thoughts and hopes to our colleagues in EDF who are unable to join us on the panel today because they are dealing with the aftermath of Storm Alex in southern France. Now, the COVID-19 crisis has been a brutal shock on the energy industry, on our industry, and the impacts have been very uneven. It has affected every part of the value chain and all parts of the system. And recovery is not going to be easy, but transformation is a much hoped for possibility. A bigger picture perspective is an essential place to start. And as a council that's been operating for 97 years, as a community, we have pulled together at this time and we are able to put this crisis into a much needed context. Last year at the 24th World Energy Congress, we discussed the changes that are affecting energy systems worldwide, building of new systems and the transition of existing systems. And we talked about energy transition as entering a new era, as having moved when we first started back in 1923 of energy for peace, of moving through a period of energy for growth, and now entering a period of energy for people, planet, and prosperity. Now, we've talked about also the changes that are happening around this period of energy for peace, planet, and prosperity. We noted the migration of value creation is moving closer to the end user. We noted the emergence of a new leadership mindset, a shift away from the supply-centric thinking to exciting discussions about the customer-centric energy future. And we also noted widespread concerns about how to manage the full cost to society of faster systems development and transition. And we noted that there's no peak in innovation, but there's a new pattern of innovation, more disruptive and also more connected and collaborative. And that led us to introduce what we call a fourth driver of change, a fourth D, to the existing 3 drivers of change that we have been noting for the last 10 years. So we now have 4 Ds driving and shaping energy system actions around the world. Those 4 Ds are digitisation, decarbonisation and decentralisation. And at the World Energy Congress, we added a 4th D, disruption as usual, and in particular from the demand side. Now, recovery is going to involve the greatest financial capital reallocation in history, and it's going to also require a collaborative innovation imperative if we are to achieve a Build Back Better outcome. It's time for us to humanise energy, to connect people and communities alongside companies and countries in the debate. It's time for us to open an honest conversation about the socio-economic impacts of energy transition and systems development. It's time for us to be frank about the full costs to society, the costs in terms of jobs and employment, the challenges of providing more energy and climate neutrality in a new context of affordability and social justice and an era of disruption. Our Humanizing energy vision was formed because of the importance of energy in the lives of everyone, everywhere. This new vision has rapidly come of age in this crisis, and I am delighted today in this panel to be able to talk about the humanizing energy challenges and opportunities as we are connecting energy societies everywhere. Let me hand back to Serge and let's have a conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Angela. So I would like to ask our different panelists to provide a brief reaction to your really clear opening statement. Jochen, you're the one I see first on screen. So if you could get started, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Serge, and also thanks, Angela. I think the introduction was perfect. I think it clearly describes the situation we're finding ourselves in, this 4D kind of approach. And when we look at disruption, many of us think of COVID, and obviously that has severe impacts. And you know, all the losses some had to suffer from are really tragic. But I think the imperative really is not to bounce back, but to go forward. And in our view, some of the strengths and some of the trends which you described are really supported by the most recent developments. So disruption and demand you mentioned, I think in a way that's more than correct. Yes, we are looking forward to have something like an ever increasing demand for electrical power typically, but also this kind of emerging hydrogen economy, I shall say, where many of the paths forward are not fully clear, and many of us are working on those. And I believe there's a lot of chances in there, clearly. When it comes to digitalization, it's clearly such in our view that, yes, it's of extreme help, specifically in those recent days. And COVID in a way also amplifies the trend that we say, let's try to make sure that we use all the technical possibilities we have. If I look at the oil and gas industry, for instance, we were able to develop things like what we call topsides 4.0. That is a kind of preventive maintenance and remote controlling of sites and assets. And part of that is really that, for instance, local workers are really connected remotely to specialists across the globe to do whatever is needed. Sometimes it's inspections, sometimes it's approvals, sometimes it's failure search or problem search. So I think this is really paying off now, and it in the future, in our view, will become the standard. If we look at decentralization, yes, it was described, I think, also more than well. The decentralization is really, I mean, a reflection of where we stand per today. If we look at hydrogen, but not only, also if we look at renewables, sometimes the generation of energy and the use of energy are completely decoupled. And for that, an improved network of energy distribution really can be part of the answer. There are things like flexible AC transmission systems which help to do this also over longer distances. And of course, we are also investigating together with many partners these power to X to power approaches actually across the globe, across the full globe by now, where in the end of the day, hydrogen becomes a central role. I think all that is still in its infancy, but it clearly shows that we are about to move into that direction. And if you look at, for instance, hydrogen as such, it's also seen typically as a national imperative or a thing where national initiatives are needed. I think 2025, more of the leading countries in the sense of GDP already have formulated a hydrogen strategy, and we expect really also according to those studies, the demand clearly going up. Hydrogen by definition, that is also in our view connected to what sometimes is called decarbonization. There's quite many interim solutions for the generation of hydrogen, for the electrolysis part of it, but then also for the use for the power generation. So in the future, there will be an increasing demand for this. We foresee individual roadmaps towards the future in nations, in countries, but perhaps also in bigger economic areas. And there will be an energy transition, which is, consisting of various elements in that path. It won't happen overnight, but it will be happening in the near future. And we, as Siemens Energy, of course, would like to be part of it. But I think in this context, we would really be appreciative to really take part in this journey we find all ourselves in together. And this is, I think, what prevails.
Okay, thanks very much, Jochen. I'll pass on to Leena for a reaction.
Thank you very much, Serge, and thank you to the World Energy Week for having me here. What I thought I would do today is share the findings of a set of consultative science meetings that we organized in IIASA along with the International Science Council on bouncing forward sustainably from COVID-19 and in the context of the energy sector, obviously. And 3 or 4 points came up, which I'm going to list very quickly because we have 2 minutes to speak. The first one really addresses itself to a lot of what Angela mentioned earlier and what Jochen brought out as well. And that is that we as an energy community possibly need to be working on an entirely new set of scenarios for the future because we have new challenges, we have new opportunities. We are faced with a situation where the human society has created multiple hazards for itself, but there are also multiple dividends that can be exploited as we go forward if we get our energy pathways right. So I think that's one key message that came out from these consultative science meetings. What also came out very strongly is the role of energy as an enabler. I think we have discussed this back and forth over the last several decades, but this has come out very strongly once again, especially when you look at the consumer centricity that we have been talking about. The fact that we are today on this particular platform, not crisscrossing the world to be participating, etc., is really focusing on the fact that we are able to get the service that we need without necessarily expending the same amount of energy as we would have otherwise. So that's the second point I wanted to make. The third point very quickly is that we need to be focusing on energy resilience rather than energy or more than energy independence and energy security. And that should be our new approach to energy as we are going forward. So the whole issue of the judicious mix between centralized as well as locally available renewable energy-based energy sources comes to the fore. And I think we need to look at energy resilience, not just as resilience for the energy sector, but how the energy sector is contributing to the resilience of society. I think we need to look at it from both the dimensions. The fourth point I wanted to make was that in the context of energy access particularly, we need to be able to shift to empowerment. So when we are talking about the 4 Ds in the World Energy Week, I think a 5th D is critically important, and that's the democratization of the energy sector and the issue of choices. Because today I think technology is able to come forward and give people the choices. We need to create the enabling environment that would allow people to access those choices that are available. And my last point that I will make for this brief intervention is that we need to find a better mix between global and local solutions. So I think we approach globalization in a very different manner in the past. Today, when we have an opportunity to rebuild, redesign the energy sector, we need to take a much more conscious choice on what parts of the energy sphere are really based on a much larger international cooperation, and what parts of the energy sector, the same value chain that we are talking about, can focus more on local context and localization. I think when we talk about redesigning the energy sector, we are focused on economic recovery and the creation of jobs. And I think the more we are able to build this in to the redesign, the better or the more robust the energy sector will be going forward. Thank you, Serge.
Very good. Thank you so much, Leena. So Kirill, last but certainly not least, if I could have your opening statement as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Serge. Dr. Wilkinson, dear colleagues in the audience, it's a big pleasure for me to join the conversation today. Let me begin by saying that it's no secret that in most countries, all sources of energy supply are supported or even subsidized in one way or another. And of course, what we call energy transition is driven by policies to the same or even greater extent than by innovation. There is a growing consensus that the only way to prevent the global climate disaster is to achieve carbon neutrality as soon as we can. It is unthinkable without phasing out fossil fuels, primarily coal. The problem is that it's come at a price, and the price is different in different energy systems and energy societies. In rich post-industrial countries, the economies are all about services and consumption. That's why GDP energy intensity is declining. Vast financial resources are available to fund the energy transition, so you can afford experimenting with, for example, the target of 50% share of intermittent renewables. It can be notoriously inefficient, however, rich countries can afford it. Middle income or poor countries where the industrial sector dominates or where industrial development is at early stages are a completely different story. Energy intensity of their economies is growing, and their financial resources are limited. These societies need a reliable and affordable energy supply to power growth. One can run an office center or a shop on electricity from solar panels and a backup diesel generator, but unfortunately, it's quite impossible to rely on it running, for example, a cement plant. So unless we offer them an alternative, these countries would have no choice but to keep cheaper and reliable fossil fuels in their energy mixes for much longer. And despite the all hype, what we can see from the figures is that what the current set of policies is pushing us in that direction. There is now about 500 gigawatt of new coal power in the global pipeline, either under construction or firmly planned, mainly in the emerging markets. It's more than all expected low carbon capacity additions, including wind, solar, hydro, and nuclear combined. The model of energy transition, which is advocated by some rich countries, simply doesn't make sense to people in other places of the world. They can't afford it. I'm convinced that nuclear energy is the answer. We should create conditions where nuclear would replace coal as a source of reliable baseload generation. We at ROSATOM fully believe in this philosophy. In our foreign orders portfolio, we currently have projects of 36 units at various stages of implementation in 12 countries. And in the past 14 years, we have connected 15 units to the grid. When I say unit, I mean the nuclear power plant with a capacity of 1,200 megawatt peak. We've especially amped out our efforts in light of the climate crisis. In 2017, we have poured concrete for 8 units, both in Russia and overseas, The majority of new units in the construction phase worldwide are based on our reactor technology. And we are not losing momentum. Physical startup procedure recently began at Unit 2 of Leningrad NPP. Fuel loading started this summer at Belarusian NPP equipped with our VVR reactor. This fits in line with the World Nuclear Association's Harmony initiative that envisages a 25% share of nuclear energy in the global energy mix before 2050. 1,000 gigawatt of nuclear capacity must be commissioned by then, which requires the industry's collective efforts toward establishing a carbon neutral future. In the context of post-COVID recovery, nothing would beat new nuclear build projects in the boosting growth, creating jobs, increasing tax revenues, and so on. Energy is empowered development, and nuclear energy is ensured sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we've heard some really interesting comments, certainly acknowledging, I think, the challenge ahead, the requirement for innovation. We've been talking about the new technologies. We've also been talking about putting the customer at the heart, if you will, of the energy transition. Now, maybe the first topic I would like to explore a little bit is the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. I think we come out of a period where, in any case, we'll see a very severe impact on GDP in most countries of the world. We also see a reduction as a consequence of some of the greenhouse gases, but there is an expectation that this will increase as the economy picks up again. But we for sure, in any case, have an impact on income of many people, and there is an impact also on capacity installed of renewables. So the first question that I would like to explore is, is there going to be an acceleration or a deceleration of the energy transition? And Leena, if you're fine, I would like to ask you that first question. So what is your perspective on the pace of the energy transition? And what is the, I would say also the associated social implication?
So I do believe that we will see an acceleration of the energy transition towards greater sustainability because of the opportunities that have come up. But having said that, I think when you review a lot of the recovery packages that have been put out by various governments, I do believe that they fall a little short of being able to define these sustainable pathways. I think in the European Green Deal, the situation is somewhat different. They do have a very clear emphasis on sustainable energy, but one cannot say that this is true across the world. I also believe that in society, there is a much greater openness, not just to look at alternative forms of energy, but alternative lifestyles as well. I think COVID-19 has definitely brought to the fore the fact that you can do with much less consumption than we had in the past in a whole range of actions. However, I think there is a mismatch between this opportunity that has opened up because of a greater societal consciousness and the response, timely response from the governance systems that we have that are signaling continued support for this kind of a transition and creating that enabling environment in which we can continue to move towards a greener kind of lifestyle. So that gap has to be filled in, and it has to be filled in fast. And I think a large part of the problem really relates to the fact that our communications in these areas are totally inadequate. The conversations that we are having across the different societies that this particular event is addressing itself to are also totally inadequate. And if we are able to address ourselves to these, we will definitely be able to move towards an accelerated transition. Will it be at the pace that we desire for purposes of addressing the climate change problem? I think the jury is still out on that.
Okay, and what would you then summarize as being the most important factors for the acceleration? Is it mostly behavior, or is it technology?
I think it has to do with the incentive systems that we are going to put in place. Incentives for the producers of energy to redirect their investments, incentives for consumers of energy to change their demand patterns, incentives for the people who are actually matching up the supply and demand, particularly in the context of renewable energy. So I think the incentive framework is something that we have to focus on squarely.
Okay, thank you very much. Kirill, if I can come back to you, you were calling out nuclear as a key technology to tackle the problem that economies that still are developing and are increasing in energy intensity, could be a really good substitute for coal. And effectively, I think 40% of the world's carbon emissions is related to power generation, and 70% of that is coal. So clearly, this will only add to the problem. Do you see an acceleration, or do you think there is an acceleration possible for the deployment of nuclear?
Yes, I think it's possible. There is plenty of evidence regarding how energy access gaps promote inequality and hamper development even in the most advanced economies. Of course, innovation in energy technologies is an absolute must to address that. The key to boosting collaborative innovation, in my view, is in the creation of what I would call infrastructure platforms. New nuclear build is a perfect example of such a platform. Take the case with localization. It speeds up economic growth and makes nuclear new build one of the most effective industrial policy instruments. In newcomer countries, localization of our project begins as 20% and increases with each new unit. In the more experienced countries, it can reach even 40% mark. Nuclear new build encourages innovation and modernization across the supply chain. You need special materials for plant equipment. You need new IT solutions, and so on. It creates a great deal of demand for the high-tech sectors, and it's proven to boost innovation. It also opens new opportunities for innovation in the way we use energy. For example, all major nuclear energy vendors, including us at ROSATOM, of course, are now working closely with inside and outside players on R&D in clean hydrogen, for example. This is pivotal to decarbonization of the transportation system. There's also a great deal of innovation in the sector of small modular reactors, SMRs, which, unlike any other sources of energy, are able to bring low carbon heat to industrial sites and homes in remote areas. We were the first in the world, by the way, to launch a modern SMR-based plant last year. Our floating nuclear power plant, Academic Lomonosov, is now based in the Chukotka, very far away region in Russia, which is not connected with the centralized grid. We are working on various innovative solutions in energy storage and grid balancing. And to sum up, you always need something which serves as a magnet for brains, creativity, and knowledge. Large-scale, high-tech energy projects like new nuclear build are proven to be of help value in that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Maybe a very last quick response, Jochen, from you. We've been talking about putting the customer more centrally and also to humanize, if you will, the energy transition. But obviously, we also need to decarbonize the industry, and this is also where you play in a very important role. So any very quick reaction as to the pace of, I would say, the energy transition with the customer base that you see, as well as the immediate benefits that they could have?
Well, thank you, Serge. Yes, COVID has slowed down the development in some sectors a little bit, but in others, really the emphasis came up that we need to focus more on collaboration and partnering. In principle, however, I think the challenges we are facing, and this comes back to the customer question, the challenges we're facing are quite diverse. We must not understand that there is on globe roughly 850 million people without access to electricity, and in many cases this also means a perhaps reduced social justice, as it sometimes is called, or the effect on democratization. So that needs to be looked at, and then we have the other developments in the other sectors. In our view, and as it was mentioned before, and also by Angela, collaboration and partnering in this kind of ecosystem is the key. And we are really, helping our customers with very specific programs to move forward to providing additional, to providing more sustainable, to providing more renewable energy, also out of the existing site structures. Please remember, we have many of the existing coal sites or gas sites, which perhaps can be looked at in the sense of developing the technology towards something more sustainable. If we look at the energy assets as such, coal, in our view, is still a thing which is growing by installation. And looking at it from an efficiency perspective, it's right now between 30 and 40%, sometimes a little bit higher. in the use of energy. Gas can go up to more than 60%, and if we look at combined cycles, this can go up to more than 90%. So really, I think it has to do with the sensitivization of the customer base, what we can do, what can be done, also with perhaps limited funding. And yes, then I do believe that solutions like an increased use of hydrogen as a fuel for gas turbines will additionally reduce the emission situation. So in our view, decarbonization clearly is the key. There are solutions around there for also providing more efficiency on the use of energy. But yes, there are parts of the globe where people don't even have access to electricity, and those also need to be looked at.
Very good. But so you're certainly, I think, also with your response addressing immediately, I think, the topic of energy affordability and the associated social justice. So I'm clearly hearing that also by means of technology, we can certainly also reconvert some of the existing, high emission plants, so to speak, onto, and basically clean them and make them more sustainable. But in terms of addressing the issue of energy affordability, energy access, also social justice, Leena, I'll come back to you. What is the, let's say, who do you see as the key parties that will be addressing this? Is it, again, governments that just need to foot the bill, or do you see that otherwise?
I think we need to be able to create an environment for small businesses to prosper. I mentioned earlier as well that today we have a lot of technology support. I mean, particularly in the context of energy access, and if you're talking about the 800 million people, I do believe that we have to look at a different set of solutions. If we are going to just focus on large utility scale renewable energy plants from a decarbonization perspective and not build the opportunities for context-specific solutions to be created, then I think this mismatch in terms of our desire to provide energy for all and those without energy access is going to continue. And I think that is a key area that we have to address ourselves to. I did also want to mention that from a decarbonization perspective, the role of demand reduction is going to be significantly important. And that's for that purpose, I think we need to look outside of the energy sector for solutions as well, which we probably haven't done enough of. But specifically to the question of energy access, I think you have to empower people to make the choice, to provide the solutions that people are looking for. And if we talk about human centricity, I think that's the direction in which we need to go.
Very good. Thank you, Leena. I would like to, Angela, ask you to provide some reflections on this. There's also a question from the audience, if you could expand a bit upon the 4Ds. Well, I don't think you need to go back, if you will, to all of them, but I think specifically in this context of disruption, when we think about a sustainable energy transition that is really, I would say, an affordable one and a social one. I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
So when we talk about disruption at the World Energy Congress last year, we talked about what we call constellations of disruption, trying to get an understanding that there are new patterns of combinatorial or constellations of innovations, policy plus technology plus behavior change. So it's not a technology-led transition anymore. It's a technology-enabled, but an innovation, a much broader system of innovation that's involved. And that's what we mean by disruption from the demand side. So we can keep working on how do we take decarbonisation of energy production, but we actually have to decarbonise whole energy societies. And every new model that I look at, whether it's clean and socially just, or it's circular, or it's regenerative, is going to require more energy in the short term or to the medium term, as well as meeting the challenges of climate neutrality. And for that, we're going to have multiple and alternative pathways, and we're going to have to use all technologies. We need to get all of them to step up and play a role. And I know the previous speakers have spoken about 850 million people, which is the basic energy poverty gap. But we really need to think also about the 3.5 billion people plus worldwide who don't have access to clean cooking, they don't have access to the energy that they need for their livelihoods. So we have to find a way of not just looking at disruptive innovation which provides clean energy generation, we have to provide a way of moving forward these new ecosystems which involve communities, countries and companies together with a new framework of connected policy innovation. And we're talking about policy that joins the dots now between fiscal, monetary, industrial, social and energy policy. So these are the challenges. The key for me is simply we have to accelerate social learning, not just technology cost curve reductions, but social learning. We have to build in behaviours, we have to take on board the differences of affordability, and it has to be a society-pulled, not a technology-pushed transition.
I think that was a really good response. Thank you for that. I would like to move on to the next topic, because we've been talking about innovation, and in any case, I think it was a very strong call out to specify this is not just a technical innovation, or technological innovation, as important as it is, but it's also in a way policy innovation. And I think also by putting the customer at the heart of the energy transition, we will effectively also see a new dynamic and new energy. So the question is the following. So how do you think that collaborative innovation in the energy transition, could close all those gaps that we're talking about, within and between connected energy societies? Kirill, could you please comment on this? You're on mute, Kirill. You're on mute.
Sorry. Now you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Look, it's becoming increasingly clear that the COVID crisis has not diverted attention from the challenges of the global energy transition. It's a good sign that many countries leak the post-crisis recovery plans to the energy transition and reducing their carbon footprint. One of the factors perhaps was a change in public perception of the quality of living during the lockdown. People started to value clear air more. In fact, in some big cities, in the weeks of the strict lockdowns, air pollution has dropped to a historic low. I saw the same in Moscow. So people learned what it's do to breathe there. On the other hand, scientists are more and more in agreement on the climate change and the lack of sustainability in development are the main drivers of the rising biological hazards, new viruses, new diseases, and so on. It speaks volumes, for example, that China, which, given the size of its population and industrial sector, is a significant contributor to global CO2 emissions, has announced its commitment to net zero by 2060 now, in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic. Driven by the understanding of the importance of carbon-free generation, China also has one of the most ambitious and robust nuclear power programs. As a supplier of safe, reliable nuclear power plants, we in ROSATOM proud to contribute it for our technology. It's in the heart of 4 units already built in the country on time and budget. There is no coincidence that in September 2020, that the Netherlands said it's looking into potential new nuclear build projects instead of copying other countries in nuclear phase out. The bottom line is the leaders now look more open to looking for solutions which would have the most efficient systemic impact on their societies and economies.
Thank you very much, Kirill. Jochen, could I move on to you? Because again, as we talk about collaborative innovation, I think this is really also something that Siemens is known for. Could you elaborate a little bit as to how is the innovation, and this is perhaps a bit more of a focus also on the technical part, but how could the innovation also close the gap? And you called out, I think, specifically hydrogen as one of the key bridging technologies that we will require. I'm not sure if you can talk a bit more about that as well.
Well, absolutely. Thanks, Serge. I mean, we typically look at our environment rather in form of an ecosystem. In this ecosystem, we need a number of players who actually collaborate to get something achieved and done. In most cases, which we look at, it is clear that not a single player as such can really make the total difference for the entirety of the project. So we need to have this ecosystem, and there's a lot of partnering going on. And if we now look at, for instance, the use of hydrogen in existing, let's say, gas plants, we right now have been focusing on our offering, the turbines, to be going up in the sense of fueling from a capability of 50 or 60%, depending on the turbine, towards up to 100%. There is a clear roadmap to that. However, the sheer amount of gas or hydrogen which is needed does require an infrastructure, and this infrastructure needs to be provided by something or somebody, and this is clearly where the ecosystem comes into play. We need to make sure that we bundle activities or have a set of partners at hand, which we have, to actually address these issues. So if we talk about hydrogen, the hydrogen has to be typically generated on the basis of renewables. Energy typically has to be used for producing hydrogen. We are one of the leading players in being able to, well, not really manufacture, but really to produce hydrogen. Hydrogen then can be used for storage as well, but again, technologies have to be elaborated. We are not alone and cannot be alone, also out of our own competence profile. And then the thing needs to be part of the fuel mix for anything else which is coming down further. So in almost all cases we are right now looking at, we look at more complex partnership in an ecosystem. This is also, I mean, the day before yesterday, I talked to Dev Sayal from BP. This is increasingly the view also from others. So we in fact will see, I believe, the rise of more collaboration-oriented partnerships amongst the existing players, because everybody is getting aware of the fact that the challenges which need to be solved cannot really be tackled successfully alone.
Very good. And can you elaborate a little bit on those, perhaps unusual partnerships that you could see forming? Because we are seeing, because of all that's going on, there is more and more convergence, I could argue, as we further electrify society, but also you can see specifically, I think the oil sector is starting to gear up and to mobilize its massive balance sheets, to also step into renewables or to think about carbon capture storage, to engage into hydrogen projects. So what are the unusual combinations or important combinations that you might see?
Well, I mean, I found it most remarkable that, not necessarily in our business, but on our customer side, players like BP, for instance, are now partnering up with their former competition, if you wish, or peers across the globe for renewable energy projects. You see that in the case of BP with Equinor or others. When we then look at the entire value chain of the hydrogen field, then yes, we need to have somebody who is doing the machinery. We need to have somebody who is doing potentially the pipeline concepts. We need to have somebody who's working on turbine concepts. We need to then work on distribution network questions. We even need to have grid stabilization to a much larger extent and much faster in reaction time than we ever needed that and had that. So all these things require a sort of combined approach, in my view, and together with the kind of policy-oriented approaches that sometimes, the operation of an energy network is separated from the energy generation in some countries. This, in my view, clearly leads to such ecosystems or partnerships in ecosystems to be founded. And each and every player has to play his role here, and each and every player has to drive innovation forward. We, in our cases, do that with the generation of hydrogen. We do that with machinery around the transportation of hydrogen, and also in the future around storage. We do it in the field of generation of power in a more classical way, but also in a more renewable way. Please remember, one of our, today it's a subsidiary in a way, Siemens Gamesa is the #1 player in offshore wind globally. And we really see a substantial growth coming up in that field. And all that wants to be looked at jointly and holistically.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Jochen. Maybe I would like, so first of all, maybe back to the audience. So I would once again like to remind you If you have any questions, please do post them in the chat box, and then I will be very happy to pass them on to the speakers. We have the option to slightly run over as we started a bit later, so we'll continue for about 10 more minutes before closing this session. Maybe back to I think the core theme, which is about connecting energy societies also to humanize, I think, the energy transition. Leena, you were calling out some of the early dividends that you believe that alternative pathways could be delivering. Can you talk a little bit about, what you see as those early pathways? And then specifically, I think, how does connecting energy societies, what would be required to achieve those dividends?
Thank you, Sergey. Can I also, possibly go back to the last question that you had on collaborative innovations? Because I think one of the critically important things from a collaborative innovation point of view is on the policy side, and you encouraged us to think about the policy side as well. So keeping in mind the need for, SDG 7 speaks about decarbonizing energy, yes, of course, but it also speaks about energy efficiencies and demand reduction, as you said, closing the gap. And to me, the whole issue of policy coherence comes up very strongly as an opportunity for collaborative innovation. When we talk about energy and food, when we talk about energy and health, or energy and urbanization, I think there are tremendous opportunities for us to reimagine the shape of the world and the shape of the economy, which will lead to a significantly lower level of energy consumption and the footprint from the energy sector. Take, for example, the whole issue of urbanization, redesigning urban spaces, redesigning the use of urban spaces, such that we are able to benefit from whatever we have learned from the COVID-19 crisis, I think can go an extremely long way. Dividends, if we also focus in the process on localization and decentralization, which came forward as a very strong demand in the consultations that we undertook, would mean that we have much more local job creation and resilience. I think I want to emphasize once again the importance of resilience in societies, because sorry, that's where we are looking at having to deal with many more hazards as we are going forward. And dividends are, of course, in this particular form. If we are also able to look at redefining our energy scenarios going forward, and a lot of, I think the energy community is involved in the development of energy scenarios. I think we will also be able to build in some of these factors of multiple hazards and multiple dividends, so that when we move forward with our energy strategy and energy resilient energy strategy, we are able to ensure that the dividends that we are looking at are also maximized. So the dividends can come in the form of definitely energy access, better energy access. The dividends can come in the form of better energy health. I think we have already started focusing on that a lot. The dividends can come in terms of better soil quality and agriculture and so on. So there are multiple examples that can be put forward from there. Thank you.
Excellent. We got an interesting question, I think, also from the audience. Somebody, because we're talking about humanizing, once again, the energy transition. So somebody asked how they could personally contribute to filling the gap within social education. So I think it's kind of interesting to see that people are effectively considering, individual contributions, because this is also how we can make a difference. So I'm not sure if somebody wants to answer that. So about personal contribution, Angela?
I think one of my big concerns is energy literacy. It's very, very poor. We use the word energy, often we mean power, or we mean fuel, or we mean heat. But actually we mean heat, power and fuel when we talk about the whole energy system. And I think when we're talking, the collaborative innovation challenge that we've been talking about is you've got to connect different technologies. We now have digital and physical. You've got to connect different sectors. It's transport and buildings and agriculture and energy. You've got to connect different policies, not just energy, but social. And you've got to understand the whole system. Today, about 20% of the total global energy mix is electrified. 80% is not electrified. And when we look at all the scenarios of the future from different organisations, we are expecting to double the amount of energy needed by 2050 and to triple the pace of electrification. Even so, by 2040 to 2050, 60% of the energy system worldwide will not be electrified. 40% will be electrified at best. And this basic literacy is lacking. We tend to talk an awful lot about decarbonisation of a very small part of the existing energy system and spend all our time talking from the supply side. How do we get generation and production of energy decarbonised? The hydrogen point, we are pushing for a shift in the way we think about this, a leadership perspective from the customer-centric side. What is going to be the demand side pull for hydrogen? How are societies going to be able to develop behaviours to safely use hydrogen? What type of goods, products and services does the hydrogen economy lend itself to? So I think that, anybody who's really interested in making a contribution, first of all, improve your own energy literacy and try and help other people understand the magnitude of the challenge. And then you'll understand that these artificial separations between green and clean are really not helpful in enabling societies to achieve affordable and reliable and inclusive energy transitions.
Very good. Thank you, Angela. I'll ask for a last reaction from the panelists before we move to closure. So I'm not sure if somebody wants to make Leena, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly to the point of personal contribution to social education. Of course, it depends on where you're coming from, and I don't have that background. But I do think that there are two key areas where we can provide personal contributions. One is by setting examples of from our own behavior. I think behavior is coming up very strongly. And the other is to be a pressure point where that is possible. So I would strongly recommend you to look at these two in your own context, and I don't know what that context is. The second issue that I did want to address myself to is again listed as one of the questions over there about distributed systems and the fact that these are currently what we have as potential distributed systems are also connected to the grid, presumably for providing stability and reliability and issues like that, which I think is critically important. But I think we have not explored enough the opportunity for economic activity to redesign itself so that it is able to match up to the variability that we have in renewable energy. And I think Angela has made reference to that several times when she said that we have focused more, or we have been driven by supply considerations rather than by the demand side. And I think we, as we are exploring forward, have to take a look at how we can redesign this energy system. The one thing that COVID-19 has shown us is that there is a great degree of innovative capacity that exists in the economic system, and the adaptability of businesses is enormous, provided there is sufficient pressure. So I think that's something for us to think about. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Leena. So as we move to closure, maybe Angela, if you could, taking into consideration everything you've heard, would you care to make a final remark?
So it's been a whole tour de force across this panel. We've talked about the need for resilience, about customer centricity, about roles for nuclear, for hydrogen, for renewables, for gas, that oil and coal will also have to play their part because we have to enable more energy to meet the new demand build-up that's coming from all different parts of the world, as well as at the same time as achieve climate neutrality. And I think if I was to leave on a note of good news, Serge, it would be that we developed a set of post-crisis scenarios to 2024. 4 scenarios. They're called rewind, pause, fast forward, and re-record. I don't have time to go into them, but we use the World Energy Transition Radar to track signals from across the world to see what is the implication for the actions that are being taken now for recovery and for coping with this crisis. And the good news is that there's 2 scenarios that indicate highest trust and highest collaboration re-record and fast forward at the moment are in the winning position. But if you look at the regional level, you see a much more mixed picture. So for me, everything's to play for, but we really have to plug in people and communities as well as companies, countries and technologies into this move forward.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Angela. So I will take in closing then, I mean, this positive note with me. If I sort of just very quickly recap some of the points that I would like to take along. We've been talking about the pace of the energy transition. So I've heard, from I think most of you that indeed we are looking forward to an acceleration and not necessarily a deceleration. I think COVID has shown that yes, we can move fast in some regards. It has shown that yes, we can change behavior. It has shown that yes, resilience is a key element that we need to integrate more and more, if you will. And very clearly, it's going to be this connection that will be required. We will be requiring all technologies. We will be requiring also social education to really make this happen. The one question that I would like to leave the audience with, if you will, to consider also, I think, for the future sessions, is to really think about, the pace in the next 10 years and how can we accelerate even more beyond what we are already doing right now. But with that, I really would like to thank all of the speakers. So thank you very much, Leena. Thank you very much, Angela, Kirill, and Jochen. I think it was really excellent, and I wish all of the participants an excellent Energy Week Live. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Serge, thank you very much indeed for hosting our first panel, and to all the panelists, a big thank you for your contribution to moving us forward in a better understanding with regard to energy transition, the realities of today, and also some of the interventions that we will make. Now, when I made my own introduction at the start of the day, I said I personally was looking forward to each of the sessions because it's an opportunity within 3 days to cram in basically a year's worth of learning during that time. And I think session 1 didn't disappoint in any way. I think from my perspective, it was good to get Angela's view with regard to energy transition, the 4 Ds, as we now call it. I think we had an addition to that from Leena, which I'll come back to a little bit. So that was, very interesting to get that context. I think also it introduced that new technologies and will be required as we think about the production of energy as we go forward. So again, it was very interesting to get the kind of update from Jochen with regard to hydrogen. I know we'll come back to that many times over the course of the next few days. I think Kirill kind of also brought the realism of the challenge. Again, when you hear that 500 gigawatts of coal plant are planned to be built over the course of the next 10 years, and we recognize the existing coal base that's already embedded around the world, you can see some of the size of the challenge that we face. And in which case, I think one of the phrases that I found helpful for me in my own thinking about energy transition is that I think when we first started talking about this, let's say 10 years ago, perhaps at that stage we thought it was a transition to one source of energy. So we had gone from wood to oil, and then we were thinking about gas, and gas may be to a renewable source. And one of the things that helped me understand transition and helped me, I hope, be a little bit broader in my understanding was that it's not one solution. Basically, the word "and" comes in. And in that context, if we are to transition to the energy requirements that the world will need by 2040 and beyond, then it's going to be an and. And nuclear, obviously, from Kirill's point of view, will play an important part of that. And some of the innovations that he talked about were very interesting in that context. I think the other context point was obviously where are we today with COVID-19 and its impact on the energy system. And I think Leena really helped me in that understanding, which is that actually, obviously, the headlines in April were very much about the demand destruction that COVID had created. But the other headlines that we should notice are the way in which societies perhaps have changed as well. So COVID, yes, has brought some challenges to the existing energy base, but I think COVID also brought in the important aspect of society. And Angela mentioned this a number of times, and a number of the other panelists did as well, is that we can sometimes get obsessed with regard to the supply base of energy as we think about energy transition. But I think one of the things that COVID-19 and the implications on an economy by economy basis has it's highlighted that our behavior, individual behavior, can change, will change, needs to change as we think about our role in terms of energy consumption and our role with regard to the carbon consumption that is required to fulfill our lifestyles. And our lifestyles potentially will need to change as much as we need to change to new technologies and new ways of creating an energy system. And I think that point was made a number of times, and I'll come back to some of the detail on that. So again, the context of the 4Ds, I think, was important. I think we then talked about some of the issues that COVID raised. I think it helps us to think about ourselves as on an individual basis, which I think will be very helpful. And I do think the other component to this is also the responses that we're likely to see. Responses both at an individual level, responses at a government level, and also a response in the context of organizations. And in that point, I think we heard, essentially from Jochen, the responses of collaboration, new forms of collaboration that we'll see as we go forward. So over the course of the hour, I think we've had a fantastic context for us in terms of thinking about what needs to be different. The context, obviously, in the terms of the 4Ds, the context in terms of what COVID requires, and the context of the likely energy system that is going to emerge, a collaborative ecosystem, very different to the ecosystem that we know today, but also our own challenges in terms of the way we will make our net zero commitments as consumers of energy over the course of the next number of years. So what else did I pick up over the course of that time? I think one of the key points that Leena made was that really needs to be highlighted is the issue of resilience. It's important, and it's important both obviously at a national level, but at a local level. And she also really highlighted that sometimes the debate and discussion that we have associated with transition is very much at a macro level. The issues of energy security for a country, the issues of what large organizations are going to do to enable their transition, the headlines of BP's new strategy, the headlines of Total and what they're doing, the headlines of what big utility companies are doing. But actually we need to think about the local aspect to this. We need to think about the individual, and we need to think about the creation of an energy system that encourages access to energy, both in terms of its generation and utilization at that local level, and building resilience into that. And that really came through with her other D that she added to the 4Ds, which is the democratization of energy, to encourage that local entrepreneurialism and investment as we think about building that ecosystem as we go forward. I think we also heard very much from Kirill the role of nuclear. And I think he's encouraging to think about nuclear differently. Not as nuclear as perhaps the large investments and the issues that we've seen perhaps over the last 20 years, but think about nuclear both in terms of its new collaboration platforms it can create, the new SMRs that are likely, small medium reactors that are likely to come on stream over the course of the next number of 10 years, and the ways in which nuclear can play a role as part as energy transition. I appreciate not everyone is going to agree to that. We're not looking for that, but it needs to be part of the debate and discussion as we go forward. I do think the other thing that really came through has been government responses to COVID and the link to green. Our own government here in the UK announced very big initiatives yesterday vis-a-vis wind power, offshore wind power, and a link to regenerating our economies. and the importance of the green agenda within that. I think Leena highlighted the fact that, they're not as connected, these policies, as we would like them to be, but they are a step in the right direction. We need to also think about the job generation opportunity that these green agendas will create. But they're linked also to the requirement for us as individuals to think about our energy footprint and how we're likely to change that as we go forward. We've also heard from Angela about the disruption, the constellation of disruption, the new ecosystems of technology, the new ways in which innovation and behavior are likely to change, not driven by technology, but enabled by technology. And recognizing that, yes, we talk about 850 million people without access to energy, but we also need to include the 3.5 billion individuals that don't have access to clean energy in the context of using it essentially for heating and for their own utilization in terms of food. We also heard that when we talk about energy, we need to be more connected in terms of policy. It's not just energy policy, it's fiscal policy, it's industrial policy, and it's policy associated with you, the individual, to encourage a different lifestyle so that we can go on this innovation journey as we go forward. Collaboration will be critical to this. Collaboration in the context of us, the energy community, but collaboration in terms of recognizing that coming up with our answers to how we are going to move forward are unlikely to be answers that can be generated by one company. And I do think that certainly for me has been one of the interesting aspects of my own journey over the course of the last 4 to 5 years. Coming from large organizations dealing with energy, I've recognized that actually the new energy system as it emerges needs to link both the supply and the demand side, as Angela mentioned in some of her closing comments. Now, we asked, before I finish, we asked a question to the poll, reading it here: which of the following drivers of change do you expect to have the biggest impact on energy societies over the next 10 years? Decarbonisation, decentralisation, digitalisation, or demand side disruption? And here we have the votes coming up. So decarbonisation, obviously, I'd say obviously, because I think as we think about transition, carbon is obviously key to that, but it's also interesting to see digitalization and demand side disruption coming through, and less votes coming through for decentralization. But I think the interesting pattern there is not necessarily seeing which wins and which doesn't, but it's basically that all four are going to be vitally important as we go forward. Now, I'm finishing my comments, and again, in summary, I found that a very, very insightful session. I hope from some of the comments that I've made, you've taken away some of that insight, and we'll build on that as we go forward over the course of the day.